The iron wheels of the locomotive groaned to a halt at Border's Edge Station, belching black smoke into the dusty afternoon air. Clarabelle Hartley clutched her worn carpetbag with trembling fingers, her Eastern dress already wilting in the desert heat. She had traveled for 5 days from Philadelphia, her corset cutting into her ribs with each jolt of the train, her heart growing heavier with every mile that separated her from everything she had ever known. The platform was nearly empty, save for a few rough-looking men loading cargo onto wagons. Clarabelle stood alone, scanning the crowd for any sign of Mr. Samuel Morrison, the man who had paid her passage west, the stranger who was to be her husband. His letters had been sparse but promising. A ranch, prosperity, a new life away from the shame that clung to her back east. An hour passed, then 2. The sun began its descent toward the jagged mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood, orange, and purple. The other passengers had long since dispersed, leaving Clarabelle standing like a lost sparrow in her faded blue dress, her blonde hair coming loose from its pins in the dry wind. "You waitin' for someone, miss?" A gruff voice made her jump. The station master, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth, regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Samuel Morrison. He was supposed to meet me." The man spat into the dirt. "Morrison lit out 2 weeks ago, sold his claim to pay gambling debts and headed for California. You one of them mail-order brides?" The words hit her like a physical blow. Clarabelle felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to remain standing. "There must be some mistake. He sent for me. I have his letters. Ain't no mistake. Miss, you ain't the first girl left high and dry at this station, and you won't be the last." He turned to go, then paused. "Boarding house is 2 blocks down. Mrs. Henley might put you up for the night if you got coin." Clarabelle's hand went to her purse. $3.47, all that remained after the train fare. She had been promised that Morrison would cover her expenses upon arrival. The boarding house was a ramshackle 2-story building that leaned precariously to one side. Mrs. Henley, a severe woman with iron-gray hair, looked Clarabelle up and down with calculating eyes. $5 a night, paid in advance. No credit, no exceptions. Please, ma'am, I've been abandoned at the station. If I could just stay one night, I'll find work tomorrow. This ain't a charity house." "Mrs. Henley interrupted. "You got $5 or you don't. Which is it?" Clarabelle shook her head mutely. The woman slammed the door in her face. Night fell like a curtain over Border's Edge. Clarabelle found herself wandering the dusty streets, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step. The saloons were coming alive, yellow lights spilling onto the wooden sidewalks along with raucous laughter and the tinny sound of piano music. Men stumbled out, reeking of whiskey, their eyes following her movements with predatory interest. Well, what have we here?" A man in a dirty suit stepped into her path. "You look lost, little dove." "Please, sir, I'm just looking for somewhere to rest. I know just the place." His smile revealed several gold teeth. "Name's Jake Thornton. I run a boarding establishment for young ladies in your situation." Clarabelle tried to step around him, but he moved to block her again. "I'm not interested. Thank you. Now don't be hasty. You're new here, probably hungry, definitely tired. I can offer you a warm bed, hot meals, even pretty dresses. All you gotta do is be friendly to some gentlemen callers." Horror dawned on Clarabelle as she understood his meaning. "Never," she said, backing away. Thornton shrugged. "Suit yourself. But this town ain't kind to women alone. You'll be back." For 3 days. Clarabelle survived on pride and the meager scraps she could find behind the hotel kitchen. She slept in the livery stable, hidden among the hay bales, washing her face and hands in the horse troughs before dawn. Her dress became torn and stained, her hair tangled despite her efforts to maintain it. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, a wild animal clawing at her insides. On the 4th morning, she woke to find Jake Thornton standing over her, flanked by 2 large men. "Time's up, little dove," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. Can't have you sleeping rough and giving the town a bad name. Sheriff says you either find respectable employment or you come with me." "I won't," Clarabelle said, though her voice shook. "I'd rather die." "That can be arranged, too." One of the men growled, cracking his knuckles. They dragged her from the stable despite her struggles. But instead of taking her to whatever den of iniquity Thornton operated, they brought her to the town square where a small platform had been erected. A crowd was gathering, mostly men, their faces flushed with alcohol despite the early hour. "Gentlemen," Thornton called out, pushing Clarabelle up onto the platform. "Fresh arrival from the east, young, pretty, and in need of protection. Shall we start the bidding at $20? Clarabelle's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. This was America, not some slave market. But the eager faces in the crowd told her otherwise. These men saw her as property, something to be bought and used. "25, someone shouted. 30, 35, and I'll throw in a bottle of whiskey." The crowd laughed. Clarabelle felt tears streaming down her face, hot with shame and rage. She had fled Philadelphia to escape disgrace, only to find herself in a hell worse than anything she had imagined. Her hands were bound behind her, preventing her from even covering herself as the men's eyes roved over her body. $50, a fat man in a merchant's apron called out, licking his lips. $60, countered a rancher with cruel eyes. The bidding climbed higher. $70, $80, $90. Clarabelle closed her eyes, praying for death, for deliverance, for anything to end this nightmare. $100, the merchant shouted triumphantly. "And that's my final offer. 100 going once." Thornton called, "Going twice." A movement at the edge of the crowd caught Clarabelle's eye. A lone figure stood apart from the others, a tall man in worn leather chaps and a battered hat pulled low over his face. He was lean as a desert wolf, his clothes mended but clean, his posture suggesting a coiled readiness that made the other men unconsciously give him space. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out something that caught the morning light. A single silver dollar. He held it up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The crowd erupted in laughter. $1, Thornton scoffed. "Boy, you must be touched in the head. The bid stands at 100. The stranger didn't move, didn't speak. He simply held the coin higher, his other hand moving to rest on the well-worn handle of the Colt at his hip. The laughter died away. There was something in his stance, in the very stillness of him, that spoke louder than words. "Now hold on," the merchant protested. "You can't just—" The stranger's head turned slightly toward him. Just that small movement was enough to make the merchant step back. Thornton looked uneasy. He knew the law of the frontier. Sometimes $1 and a gun were worth more than $100 in cowardice. "Anyone else?" he asked weakly. Silence. "Sold," Thornton muttered, clearly unhappy. To the man with $1. The stranger walked forward with measured steps, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He climbed onto the platform and stood before Clarabelle, who shrank back instinctively. Up close, she could see his face beneath the hat's brim, weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. A terrible scar ran across his throat, white against his tanned skin. Without a word, he shrugged off his duster and draped it around her shoulders, covering her torn dress. The coat smelled of leather and sage, of campfires and vast open spaces. Then he cut her bonds with a single swift motion of his knife. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he helped her down from the platform. Someone muttered, "What's the mute gonna do with her up in them mountains?" Another voice slurred with drink. "Maybe he can't talk, but I bet he knows what to do with a woman." More laughter, ugly and insinuating. The stranger's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He simply placed a gentle hand on Clarabelle's elbow and guided her toward a paint horse tied at the hitching post. Clarabelle followed numbly, her mind unable to process this sudden turn. She had been saved from one fate. But what awaited her now? This silent man who had bought her for $1. What did he want? The coat around her shoulders was warm, but she shivered nonetheless. stealing glances at her rescuer's scarred throat and wondering what violence had stolen his voice. As they reached the horse, he paused and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes, she realized with a start, were kind. The journey from Border's Edge took them deep into the wilderness, following trails that seemed to exist only in the stranger's mind. Clarabelle rode behind him on the paint horse. Her arms reluctantly circled around his waist for balance. She could feel the lean strength of him through his shirt, the way he moved in perfect harmony with the horse's gait. Neither spoke, he because he couldn't, and she because terror had frozen her tongue. The landscape changed as they climbed higher into the foothills. The dusty flatlands gave way to red rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels against the sky. Juniper and pinon pines dotted the slopes, their twisted forms casting sharp shadows in the afternoon sun. Hawks circled overhead, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. Clarabelle's mind raced with dark possibilities. Where was he taking her? What would he do when they arrived? The men in town had laughed about the mute taking a woman to the mountains. She shuddered, remembering their crude suggestions. Yet something about this man's careful handling of the horse, the way he had covered her with his coat without any improper touching, made her wonder if her fears were misplaced. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they crested a ridge and Clarabelle gasped. Below them lay a small valley, green with pine and aspen, bisected by a stream that caught the dying light like a ribbon of gold. Nestled against the far slope sat a cabin, modest but sturdy, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A small corral held 2 horses, and she could see the neat rows of a vegetable garden. The stranger, she still didn't know his name, guided the horse down a switchback trail with practiced ease. As they approached the cabin, a dog emerged from beneath the porch, tail wagging. It was a mongrel of indeterminate breeding, but its coat was brushed and it wore a leather collar. The man dismounted first, then turned to help Clarabelle down. His hands at her waist were impersonal, careful, and he stepped back the moment her feet touched the ground. He gestured toward the cabin, then began unsaddling the horse. Clarabelle stood uncertainly, clutching his coat around her shoulders. Should she go inside? Wait for him? Run? But where would she run to? Miles from anywhere. With night falling? The cabin door wasn't locked. Inside. She found a single room divided into areas by furniture placement and function. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair placed before it. A narrow bed with a colorful quilt occupied one corner, while a table and 2 chairs sat beneath the single window. Everything was clean, orderly, with small touches that surprised her. A vase of wildflowers on the table, books on a rough-hewn shelf, a braided rug on the plank floor. The stranger entered, carrying her carpet bag and his saddlebags. He set her bag near the door, then moved to the fireplace to kindle a fire. His movements were economical, practiced. Once the flames caught, he went to a cabinet and removed items. A loaf of bread, dried meat, a jar of preserves. He set them on the table, then filled a pitcher with water from a bucket by the door. Clarabelle watched all this in bewildered silence. He was preparing food for her, she realized. Simple fare, but more than she'd had in days. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but uncertainty held her back. The man noticed her hesitation. He pulled out a chair, gestured to it, then retreated to the far side of the room. The message was clear. Eat. He wouldn't come near her. Hunger won over fear. Clarabelle sat and ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite as her body remembered what it was to be fed. The bread was rough but fresh, the meat tough but flavorful. She drank 2 full cups of water, feeling life seep back into her depleted body. As she ate, she studied him covertly. He busied himself with small tasks, banking the fire, filling a wash basin, laying out a bedroll on the floor near the hearth. The scar across his throat was more visible in the firelight, a violent slash that must have nearly killed him. No wonder he couldn't speak. When she finished eating, he approached the table slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. He cleared the dishes, then pointed to the bed, to her. and then to himself and the bedroll by the fire. The meaning was clear. The bed was hers. He would sleep on the floor.
Thank you,
Clarabelle said, her voice rusty with disuse.
but I don't understand. Why did you buy me? What do you want?
He paused in his movements, then shrugged. From his pocket, he produced a small slate and a piece of chalk, the kind children used for lessons. In careful letters, he wrote, "You needed help. But your dollar, it was all you had, wasn't it?" A nod. "Why waste it on me?" He considered this, then wrote, "Not waste." Tears pricked at her eyes. After days of being treated as less than human, this simple kindness overwhelmed her. "What's your name?" "Eli McCall," he wrote. "I'm Clarabelle Hartley," she said, though he probably knew that from the auction. "Mr. McCall, I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head, pointed to the bed again, then stepped outside, giving her privacy to prepare for sleep. Clarabelle changed into her one clean nightgown with trembling fingers, half expecting him to return and demand what men usually demanded. But he stayed outside for a full half hour, and when he knocked softly before entering, he kept his eyes averted as he spread his bedroll by the fire. That first night, Clarabelle lay rigid in the narrow bed, listening to every sound. The cabin creaked as it settled, the fire popped and hissed. Outside, an owl called, and something, probably the dog, rustled beneath the porch. But from Eli McCall, sleeping on the hard floor, there came only the quiet rhythm of breathing. The days that followed established a pattern that slowly eased Clarabelle's fears. Eli rose before dawn to tend his small ranch. A few cattle, the horses, chickens in a coop she hadn't noticed before. He worked constantly, repairing fences, hauling water, cutting wood for the approaching winter. Clarabelle, unsure of her place, began helping where she could, gathering eggs, tending the garden, preparing simple meals. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and occasionally the slate when something complex needed to be said. She learned that he had lived here alone for 3 years, that he traded horses and cattle in town twice a year for supplies, that the scar on his throat came from an Apache raid when he was younger. He had been 15, working as a scout for the army. The warriors had left him for dead, his voice destroyed forever. In return, Clarabelle found herself sharing her own story, how her father had died in debt, leaving her and her mother destitute, how she had worked in a factory until the owner's son had forced his attentions on her, how she had found herself with child and unmarried, cast out by her mother in shame, how the baby had come too early and died, leaving her with nothing but grief and a reputation in ruins. "I answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride because I had nowhere else to go," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson. "I thought it would be a new start. I was such a fool." Eli wrote on his slate, "Not fool, hopeful, different things." She laughed bitterly. "Hope, that's what got me sold like a livestock in the town square." He was quiet for a long moment, then wrote, "You're safe here." "For how long?" she asked. "You spent your last dollar on me." "Mr. McCall, winter's coming. How will we manage?" "I managed before, we'll manage now. But that was just you. Now you have another mouth to feed." He looked at her directly then, and wrote, "You work hard. Help comes in many forms." It was true. In the weeks since her arrival, the cabin had become more of a home. She had mended his clothes, organized his scattered belongings, preserved vegetables from the garden for winter. She had brought order to his bachelor existence without even realizing it. Still, Clarabelle couldn't shake the feeling that this was temporary, a dream from which she would inevitably wake at night. She sometimes heard him moving restlessly on his bedroll and wondered if he regretted his impulsive purchase. By day, they worked in companionable silence, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read. The first snow came early, dusting the peaks with white that crept lower each day. Eli worked even harder, bringing the cattle closer to the cabin, chopping what seemed like mountains of wood. Clarabelle helped where she could, her soft eastern hands growing calloused, her pale skin browning despite the bonnet she wore. One afternoon, as she struggled to carry an armload of wood, she tripped on a hidden root. The logs went flying, and she landed hard, crying out as her ankle twisted beneath her. Eli was there in an instant, dropping his axe, his face creased with concern. "I'm all right," she gasped, trying to stand, but when she put weight on the ankle, pain shot up her leg. Without hesitation, Eli scooped her up in his arms. She stiffened, memories of unwanted touches flooding back, but his hold was careful, protective rather than possessive. He carried her to the cabin and set her gently in the rocking chair, then knelt to examine her ankle with surprisingly gentle fingers. "Not broken," he wrote after careful prodding. "Needs rest." He wrapped the ankle with strips of cloth, then heated water for soaking. As he worked, Clarabelle found herself studying his bent head, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. His hands were work-roughened but infinitely careful. When was the last time anyone had tended to her with such care? That night, the first blizzard struck with a fury that shook the cabin. Wind howled through the valley like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows. Clarabelle huddled in bed, listening to the storm's rage, when a terrible crack split the air. Part of the roof in the corner began to sag, and snow poured through a growing gap. Eli leaped up, grabbing tools to shore up the damage. Clarabelle forgot her injured ankle, rushing to help hold boards while he nailed. The wind tore at them, snow blinding, cold so fierce it burned. Together they fought to save their shelter, working as one until finally, the gap was sealed. They collapsed by the fire, soaked and shivering. Eli added more wood, then noticed Clarabelle's violent trembling. Without hesitation, he grabbed blankets, wrapping them around her, rubbing her arms to restore warmth. She leaned into his solid presence, and suddenly they were holding each other, sharing heat, sharing strength. In that moment, with the storm raging outside and warmth blooming between them, Clarabelle felt something shift in her chest. This man who couldn't speak had said more with his actions than any words could convey. He had saved her, sheltered her, protected her, asking nothing in return. "Eli," she whispered against his shoulder. "I thank you." His arms tightened briefly, and she felt him press his lips to the top of her head, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. They stayed that way until the shivering stopped, until the fire burned low, until something new and fragile and precious took root in the space between them. When morning came, bringing weak sunshine and a world transformed by white, they worked to clear the snow in companionable silence. But something had changed. Their hands brushed more often. Their eyes met and held. The cabin, once a shelter, began to feel like home. The snow melted gradually, revealing a world washed clean and new. The valley came alive with the sounds of spring birds returning from their winter grounds, the stream swollen with snowmelt, and the first green shoots pushing through the damp earth. Clarabelle and Eli fell into a rhythm of shared work that felt as natural as breathing. She had discovered that Eli, despite his inability to speak, was far from silent. He communicated in a dozen different ways, a raised eyebrow when she said something that amused him, a gentle touch on her shoulder when she seemed troubled, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was pleased. She found herself learning this new language, becoming fluent in the subtle grammar of gesture and expression. The slate became less necessary as time passed, though Eli still used it for complex thoughts. One morning, she found him writing something, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she approached with his coffee, a luxury they allowed themselves once a week, he quickly covered the slate. "Secrets, Mr. McCall," she teased, setting the cup beside him. He gave her a look that was almost shy, then slowly revealed what he had written. "You make this place brighter." Clarabelle felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's just, I like keeping things tidy." She stammered. He shook his head, pointed to the flowers she'd planted by the porch, the curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks, the way she hummed while she worked. Then he pointed to his chest, right over his heart. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Clarabelle found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than reason. But then a horse whinnied from the corral, breaking the spell, and they returned to their tasks with careful distance between them. Yet that distance seemed to shrink with each passing day. When they worked side by side in the garden, their hands would brush as they reached for the same tool. When she served dinner, she would let her fingers linger on his as she passed him his plate. When they sat on the porch in the evenings, their chairs seemed to drift closer together. One afternoon, while Eli was checking his trap lines, Clarabelle decided to wash his spare shirts. As she scrubbed them in the basin, she noticed how threadbare they were, how many times they'd been mended. On impulse, she retrieved fabric from her trunk material she'd been saving for a new dress for herself and set about making him a new shirt. She was still sewing when he returned at sunset, a brace of rabbits over his shoulder. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work by lamplight, and she looked up to find an expression on his face she'd never seen before, something soft and wondering. "It's nothing fancy," she said quickly, "but I thought, well, summer's coming, and—" He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his, stilling her nervous words. His thumbs brushed over her fingers, calloused against calloused, and she felt that touch all the way to her bones. He studied the partially finished shirt, then looked at her with such gratitude that tears pricked her eyes. That night, after dinner, he surprised her by bringing out a wooden box she'd noticed but never asked about. Inside were sheets of paper covered with pencil sketches, landscapes mostly, but also animals, plants, moments of life captured with surprising skill. Near the bottom, she found recent additions: a woman hanging laundry, her hair blowing in the breeze, the same woman reading by firelight, feeding chickens, laughing at something outside the frame. "Is this how you see me?" she whispered, tracing the confident lines of the drawings. He nodded, then wrote on his slate, "Beautiful." Clarabelle's breath caught. No one had ever called her beautiful. Pretty, perhaps, in the calculating way men had when they wanted something. But this was different. This was him showing her herself through his eyes, strong, capable, lovely in her ordinary moments. "Eli," she began, but he was already standing, moving to bank the fire for the night. She recognized the retreat, the careful distance he maintained when things grew too intimate. Part of her was relieved. Part of her wanted to call him back. As spring deepened toward summer, they ventured farther from the cabin together. Eli showed her his favorite places, a grove of aspens where deer came to drink, a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers, a pool where the stream widened and fish darted like silver shadows. Clarabelle had never known such freedom, such space. The mountains that had seemed forbidding now felt like protective walls, keeping the ugliness of the world at bay. One particularly warm day, they climbed to a ridge that offered a view of the entire valley. The world spread before them in shades of green and gold, with snow-capped peaks rising in the distance. Hawks circled on thermals far below, and the air was sweet with pine and sage. "It's perfect," Clarabelle breathed, spreading her arms as if she could embrace it all. "Like paradise." Eli smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. He wrote, "Better now." Better? How could it be better? He pointed at her, then at the view, then back at her. The meaning was clear. She had improved upon perfection simply by being there. The compliment made her bold. "Eli McCall, are you sweet-talking me?" His eyes danced with mirth as he wrote, "If I could talk, yes." They laughed together, the sound echoing off the rocks. Then Clarabelle grew serious. "I used to dream about love," she said softly. "When I was young and foolish, I thought it would be like the novels, grand declarations, passionate speeches. I never imagined." She trailed off, but Eli touched her hand, encouraging her to continue. "I never imagined it could be quiet," she finished. "That it could grow in silence like your garden. That it could be in the small things, coffee in the morning, mended shirts.
Someone who knows without words when you're sad or happy or scared. Eli was very still beside her. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand to her face, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. His eyes asked a question she wasn't quite ready to answer. "We should head back," she whispered. "It'll be dark soon." He nodded, but as they made their way down the mountain, he stayed close, his hand finding hers to steady her over rough patches. And this time, when they reached even ground, neither of them let go. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their usual routine, Eli to his bedroll, Clarabelle to the bed, she found herself speaking into the darkness. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said quietly. "When I first came here, I was terrified. Of you, of this place, of what would become of me. But I'm not afraid now." She heard him shift on his bedroll, knew he was listening. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about what makes a home. It's not walls and a roof. I had those in Philadelphia. It's not even safety, though that matters. It's knowing someone sees you, really sees you, and doesn't turn away." The silence stretched, but it was a comfortable silence, full of understanding. Then she heard movement, and Eli appeared beside the bed, his slate in hand, by the dying firelight. She read what he'd written. "You see me too." Their eyes met and held. Clarabelle reached out, her fingers finding the scar across his throat, that violent mark that had stolen his voice, but not his ability to speak to her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "I see you." He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. The question in his eyes was clearer now, and this time, she had an answer. "Stay," she said softly. "Don't go back to the floor. Just stay." He hesitated, a lifetime of honor warring with desire. Clarabelle shifted, making room, and patted the narrow space beside her. "Just asleep," she clarified, though her own heart was pounding. "I'm tired of being alone." Slowly, carefully, Eli settled beside her on the narrow bed. They lay facing each other in the darkness, not touching except where their knees bumped, where their breath mingled in the space between them. Clarabelle could see the gleam of his eyes, watchful and tender. "Tell me something," she whispered, without the slate. "Just tell me." His hand found hers between them. Slowly, he traced letters on her palm. I-L-O-V-E. "I love you too," she breathed, and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative. Two wounded souls finding solace in each other. His hand cupped her face with infinite care, and she could taste the salt of tears, hers or his. She couldn't tell. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers, and they breathed together in the darkness. They held each other through the night, fully clothed, hearts gradually slowing to match each other's rhythm. No more was needed. No more was taken. They had found something precious in this valley, something worth more than all the grand passions in all the novels. They had found home in each other. As dawn broke through the window, painting the room in shades of gold and rose, Clarabelle woke to find Eli watching her, his face soft with wonder. She touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin, the solid reality of him. "Good morning," she whispered. He smiled and traced letters on her palm again. Best morning. And it was. Summer bloomed across the valley in waves of color and warmth. The days grew longer, filled with shared work that no longer felt like labor, but rather like building something together. Clarabelle and Eli moved around each other with the easy grace of partners who had learned each other's rhythms. A touch here, a glance there. Their communication had evolved beyond words or even gestures into something deeper. The garden flourished under their combined care. Corn stalks reached toward the sky. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, and beans climbed the poles Eli had set. Clarabelle learned to can and preserve, preparing for the winter that seemed impossibly far away in the golden warmth of July. She found satisfaction in the rows of jars lining the shelves, each one a small victory against hunger and want.
Their relationship had shifted since that night of confessions, though they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements most nights. But sometimes, when storms rolled through the valley or when nightmares of the auction block woke Clarabelle with a cry, Eli would hold her until the shaking stopped. His presence was an anchor, his silent strength a bulwark against the memories that tried to drag her under. One afternoon, while Eli was working on repairing the chicken coop, Clarabelle decided to wash clothes at the stream. The day was hot, the water cool and inviting. She had just finished wringing out the last shirt when she heard horses approaching. Her blood ran cold. No one ever came to their valley. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, rough-looking men with calculating eyes. Clarabelle's hands went numb as she recognized one of them from Border's Edge, one of the men who had bid on her. "Well, well," the leader drawled, dismounting. "So this is where the mute keeps his woman. We were wondering." "You're on private property," Clarabelle said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "You need to leave." "Now that ain't very neighborly," another man said, moving to flank her. "We rode all this way just to check on you. Make sure you're being treated proper." "I'm fine. Now please go." The leader laughed. "Fine? Living up here like a savage with a man who can't even talk? That ain't what I'd call fine. Now, if you were to come with us, we could show you what fine really means." Clarabelle backed toward the cabin, but the third man moved to cut her off. Panic rose in her throat. Where was Eli? Could he see what was happening? "Don't make this difficult, sweetheart," the leader said, advancing. "The mute paid $1 for you. I'll give him 10. That's good profit. I'm not for sale." Clarabelle spat. "Everything's for sale at the right price." A shadow fell across the ground. Eli stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle held loosely in his hands. His face was calm, but Clarabelle had learned to read the storm in his eyes. "Well now," the leader said, hand moving toward his pistol. "The mute wants to play hero." Eli's rifle swung up so fast it was a blur. The shot echoed off the mountain walls, and the leader's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. "Son of a—" The man's hand froze on his pistol grip. Eli worked the lever, chambering another round. His eyes never left the leader's face. "Now hold on," one of the other men said nervously. "We didn't mean nothing, just checking on the lady." Eli jerked his chin toward their horses. The message was clear. "Leave, now. You can't guard her forever. Mute." The leader snarled as he retrieved his ruined hat. "Someday you'll be gone, and then—" Another shot. This time the bullet kicked up dust an inch from the man's boot. Eli levered another round, his expression unchanging. The men scrambled for their horses, cursing and threatening, but they rode hard for the tree line. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded completely did Eli lower his rifle. Clarabelle ran to him, her whole body shaking. "They'll be back," she whispered against his chest. "You know they'll be back." Eli held her tight, his hand stroking her hair. Then he set her aside gently and went to his saddlebags. He pulled out a small leather pouch and showed her the contents. Gold coins, perhaps $20 worth. She looked at him in confusion. "I thought the $1 was all you had." He nodded, then wrote on his slate. "It was. This is from selling horses last month." "Then why?" "$1 was enough," he wrote. "Didn't want them to think you were worth more to them." The logic was sound, if heartbreaking. By paying the minimum, he'd made her seem worthless in their eyes. Only now, that protection was crumbling. "We could leave," Clarabelle suggested. "Go somewhere else. Start over." Eli shook his head firmly. He gestured around the valley. Their home, their life. Then he wrote, "Running means they win." That night, Eli didn't return to his bedroll. He sat by the window with his rifle, keeping watch. Clarabelle lay in bed, unable to sleep, watching his silhouette against the stars. The safety she had found here felt fragile now, threatened by the outside world's intrusion. Days passed in tense vigilance. Eli rarely left her alone, and when he did, he made sure she had the shotgun close at hand. They worked side by side, but the easy peace was gone, replaced by constant wariness. A week after the men's visit, they were building a new fence for the expanded garden when Clarabelle stopped, overwhelmed by a wave of frustration and sorrow. "This isn't fair," she said, throwing down her hammer. "We've done nothing wrong. We're not hurting anyone. Why can't they just leave us alone?" Eli set down his tools and came to her. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the angry tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I'm so tired of being afraid," she whispered. "I thought I was done with that when I came here." He pulled her close, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. When he drew back, he wrote, "I won't let them take you. How can you stop them? You're one man, and you can't even call for help." His eyes flashed with something fierce. He wrote quickly, "Don't need words to protect what's mine." Yours. The word should have frightened her, should have reminded her of being property. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. He nodded, then wrote more carefully, "If you want to be." Clarabelle looked at this man who had saved her with his last dollar, who had shown her kindness without expectation, who even now was willing to stand against the world for her. The answer rose from deep within, sure and strong. "Yes," she said, "yours, and you're mine." The kiss that followed was different from their tentative explorations. This was claiming and being claimed, a promise sealed without words. When they parted, both breathing hard, Eli wrote one word. When? She understood. When would she truly be his? When would they cross that last boundary? "Tonight," she whispered. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want fear to steal any more from us." That evening, as the sun painted the mountains in shades of crimson and gold, they stood together at the edge of the valley. Eli had brought wildflowers from the meadow, and Clarabelle wore the dress she had made from the fabric meant for his shirt, a soft blue that matched the evening sky. "I know we don't have a preacher," she said, taking his hands. "I know it won't be legal in the eyes of the law, but I want you to know, before God and these mountains, that I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us." Eli squeezed her hands, then released one to write on his slate. "With my body, I thee worship. With my heart, I thee keep. With my life, I thee protect. With my voice, I'll speak for both of us." Clarabelle promised, "With my hands, I'll help build our life. With my love, I'll make this cabin a home." They sealed their vows with a kiss as the first stars appeared overhead. Then, hand in hand, they walked back to the cabin that was no longer his or hers, but theirs, inside. Clarabelle lit candles instead of the lamp, casting the room in soft, dancing light. Eli watched her from beside the fire, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper, reverence, perhaps, or wonder. "I'm not afraid," she told him, moving to stand before him. "Not with you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to retreat, and unpinned her hair. It fell around her shoulders in waves of gold, and he ran his fingers through it with gentle fascination. She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek, then turned to kiss his palm. What followed was a dance as old as time, yet unique to them, two wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. Eli's hands spoke eloquently of his devotion, mapping her body like he was learning a new language. Clarabelle discovered that silence could be its own music, that love needed no words when every touch sang with meaning. They loved with the desperation of those who knew how fragile happiness could be, yet also with the reverence of those who recognized the sacred in each other. Past hurts faded in the face of present joy. Scars, both visible and hidden, became maps of survival rather than shame. In the aftermath, they lay entwined on the narrow bed that had never seemed small until now. Clarabelle traced the scar on Eli's throat, then kissed it gently. "You may not have a voice," she whispered, "but you've never been silent. Not to me." He caught her hand, pressed it over his heart where she could feel it beating strong and sure. In the candlelight, his eyes spoke volumes: gratitude, wonder, love, and fierce determination to keep her safe. Outside, The night sounds of the valley continued their ancient chorus. Inside, two people who had been broken by the world had found in each other the pieces needed to become whole. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Danger still lurked beyond their valley. Prejudice and hardship would test them. But for now, in this moment, they were complete. The weeks following their private ceremony passed in a haze of quiet joy. Clarabelle had never known such contentment could exist. Waking each morning in Eli's arms, working side by side through the days, sharing the evenings in comfortable companionship. The shadow of the men's threats seemed to fade with each passing day of peace. But shadows have a way of returning when least expected. It was a morning in late August when everything changed. Eli had gone to check his trap lines early, leaving Clarabelle to tend the garden. She was humming as she worked, her hands deep in the soil, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Sheriff Briggs from Border's Edge, accompanied by 6 deputies. The leader of the men who had threatened her weeks ago rode with them, a smug smile on his face. "Mrs. McCall," the sheriff called out, though his tone made it clear he didn't recognize the title. "Or should I say, Miss Hartley, we need you to come with us." Clarabelle stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. "On what grounds?" "Well now, that's the question, isn't it?" The sheriff dismounted, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "Seems there's some dispute about your situation here. Mr. Thornton filed a complaint that you're being held against your will." "That's absurd," Clarabelle said firmly. "I'm here by choice. This is my home." "Can you prove that?" Thornton asked, his voice oily with false concern. "Is there a marriage certificate? Any legal documentation?" Clarabelle's heart sank. Of course there wasn't. No preacher would have married them without proper paperwork. And she had no legal identity beyond the mail-order bride contract that Morrison had abandoned. "The fact remains," Sheriff Briggs continued. "You were legally purchased at auction by Mr. McCall, without proof of marriage. That makes you, well, it don't look right. Town's talking. Let them talk." Clarabelle said defiantly. "Can't do that. Ma'am, Border's Edge has laws about moral conduct, unmarried folks living in sin and all that." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You'll need to come with us for questioning. Mr. McCall, too, when he returns." "I won't go." The sheriff's hand moved to his pistol. "Don't make this difficult. Ma'am, I've got orders." Clarabelle looked around desperately, hoping to see Eli emerging from the forest, but the mountains remained silent. She was alone. "At least let me leave a note," she pleaded, "so he knows what happened." The sheriff nodded grudgingly. Clarabelle went inside on shaking legs, wrote quickly on Eli's slate. "Taken to town by sheriff. Don't fight them. I love you." They put her on a horse, surrounding her like she was a criminal. As they rode away, Clarabelle looked back at the cabin, at the garden they'd planted together, at the life they'd built. Tears blurred her vision, but she held her head high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The ride to Border's Edge took most of the day. By the time they arrived, word had spread. People lined the streets, staring and whispering. Clarabelle recognized some faces from the auction, saw the mixture of pity and condemnation in their eyes. They took her to the jail, though the sheriff had the decency to put her in a small room above his office rather than a cell. "Just until we sort this out," he said, almost apologetically. "Sort what out?" Clarabelle demanded. "I've committed no crime. That's for Judge Harrison to decide. He'll be through next week." A week. They meant to keep her here a week, away from Eli, away from home. The room was sparse, a cot, a wash basin, a small barred window that looked out onto the dusty main street. Clarabelle sank onto the cot, fighting despair. Hours later, she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw Eli ride in on his paint horse, moving fast. His face when he dismounted was terrible to see, cold fury mixed with desperate worry. He strode toward the sheriff's office, and Clarabelle pressed against the bars. "Eli!" she called out. His head snapped up, finding her immediately. Relief flickered across his features before hardening back to determination. He burst through the office door, and Clarabelle heard raised voices, furniture scraping, then nothing. Long minutes of silence before footsteps on the stairs. Sheriff Briggs unlocked her door, sporting a split lip. Behind him, 2 deputies held Eli's arms. Though he wasn't struggling, blood dripped from a cut above his eye. "You can have 5 minutes," the sheriff said gruffly. "That's all." The deputies released Eli, and he crossed to Clarabelle in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. She could feel him trembling with rage or fear. She couldn't tell. "I'm all right," she whispered against his chest. "Don't do anything foolish. We'll figure this out." He pulled back, cupping her face, his eyes asking a dozen questions. Then he reached for the slate the sheriff had grudgingly provided and wrote, "I'll get you out." "How? They want proof we're married. Legal proof we don't have." His jaw tightened. He wrote, "Then we'll get it." "Time's up," the sheriff announced. Eli kissed her forehead, a promise in the gesture. Then he allowed himself to be escorted out. Through the window, Clarabelle watched him cross to the hotel, his stride purposeful, whatever plan was forming in his mind. She prayed it wouldn't get him killed. The next days passed in a blur of monotony and worry. The sheriff's wife, a kind woman named Martha, brought meals and news, and Eli had hired a lawyer from the next town, was fighting the charges, but it wasn't looking good. The law was clear about moral violations, and without a marriage certificate, they had little defense. Thornton visited once, offering to drop all charges if Clarabelle would accept his protection. She told him in very clear terms what he could do with his offer. He left red-faced and furious, promising she'd regret her choice. On the 4th day, Martha Briggs slipped into the room with more than just supper. "There's someone wants to see you," she whispered. "Can't stay long." She ushered in an elderly woman Clarabelle vaguely recognized from town, Mrs. Adelaide Prescott, widow of the town's founder, walked with a cane, but her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Sit, girl," she commanded, lowering herself onto the cot. "Martha, keep watch." "Mrs. Prescott, I don't understand." "I was a mail-order bride once," the old woman interrupted. 43 years ago, came west with nothing but hope and a promise that turned to dust. I know what it's like to be bought and sold like cattle." Clarabelle's throat tightened. "Then you understand." "I understand more than you know. I also understand that Eli McCall is a good man. Helped me once when rustlers took my horses. Asked nothing in return. Can't speak, but his actions are louder than most men's words." "They won't listen. Without legal proof?" "There are different kinds of proof." "Mrs. Prescott said firmly, "I've written to Judge Harrison. Told him what I think of this whole mess. Others have too, folks who know Eli, who've seen how he's looked after you." "Will it be enough?" The old woman's face softened. "I don't know, child, but I wanted you to know you're not alone. Some of us remember what it's like to be desperate and female in this hard country. We won't let them railroad you without a fight." After she left, Clarabelle sat in the gathering darkness, hope warring with despair. Outside, Border's Edge went about its evening routines, piano music from the saloons, dogs barking, men laughing, normal life continuing while hers hung in the balance. She thought of the cabin in the mountains, of the vegetables that needed harvesting, of the bed that would be cold and empty tonight. Most of all, she thought of Eli, his gentle hands, his expressive eyes, the way he made her feel safe and cherished without saying a word. On the 6th night, she was awakened by soft tapping at her window, heart pounding. She crept over to see Eli balanced precariously on the hotel's side roof. He held up his slate. "Tomorrow, be ready." Before she could respond, he was gone, melting into the shadows like the ghost some folks claimed he was. Clarabelle returned to bed, but sleep was impossible. Tomorrow the judge would arrive. Tomorrow their fate would be decided. She pressed her hand to her stomach, where a secret had been growing for weeks now. She hadn't told Eli yet had wanted to be certain, but now, facing the possibility of separation, she wished desperately that she had. Would it matter to the judge that she carried Eli's child? Or would it only make things worse? Another mark against her already tarnished reputation. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of more horses, more voices. Through her window, Clarabelle could see the street filling with people. The monthly circuit judge's visit was always an event, but this time the crowd seemed larger, more agitated. Martha Briggs came with breakfast and a clean dress. "Best look respectable," she said kindly. "Judge Harrison's a fair man, but he's traditional." Clarabelle dressed carefully, pinning her hair in a severe bun, trying to look like the proper woman she'd never quite managed to be. Her hands shook as she fastened the buttons. A knock at the door made her jump. Sheriff Briggs entered, looking official and uncomfortable. "Time to go, ma'am. Judge is ready." The makeshift courtroom in the town hall was packed. Clarabelle spotted Eli immediately, sitting ramrod straight in the front row. He'd shaved, wore his new shirt, the one she'd made him. Their eyes met, and he gave her the slightest nod of encouragement. Judge Harrison was a silver-haired man with penetrating eyes and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. He reviewed the papers before him, then looked up. "This is highly irregular," he began. "Miss Hartley, you stand accused of moral violation, specifically living in sin with a man to whom you are not legally wed." "How do you plead?" Clarabelle stood, her voice clear despite her terror. "I plead not guilty. Your Honor, Eli McCall and I exchanged vows before God in the mountains. We are married in every way that matters." "The law requires more than personal conviction," the judge said sternly. "Mr. Thornton, present your case." What followed was a litany of accusations and insinuations that made Clarabelle's skin crawl. Thornton painted her as a woman of loose morals, Eli as a deviant who had taken advantage of a desperate situation. The auction was presented as a charitable effort to find her proper placement, which Eli had corrupted with his base desires. Through it all, Eli sat silent, his inability to speak his own defense a palpable frustration in the room. Clarabelle wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but she held her tongue, waiting for their turn. When it came, their lawyer, a young man named Davis, who seemed overwhelmed by the crowd, did his best. He presented character witnesses for Eli, read statements from Mrs. Prescott and others, but without legal documentation, without Eli's own voice to defend them. It felt hollow. "If I may, Your Honor," Clarabelle said suddenly, standing despite Davis's attempts to stop her. "I would like to speak for myself, and for my husband, who cannot." The judge considered, then nodded. "Proceed." Clarabelle walked to the center of the courtroom, feeling every eye upon her. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from Eli's steady gaze, and began to speak. "Your Honor, I came to Border's Edge as a mail-order bride. That much is true. I was desperate, abandoned, with nowhere to turn. When Mr. Morrison failed to meet me, I found myself in circumstances I wouldn't wish on any woman." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "For days I slept in the streets, ate scraps like a stray dog, all while men like Mr. Thornton circled me like vultures." "Objection!" Thornton shouted. "She's slandering." "Sit down, Mr. Thornton," Judge Harrison said coldly. "Continue, Miss Hartley. When they put me on that auction block, I wanted to die. They stripped me of my dignity, my humanity, reduced me to a price. And the men bidding?" She looked directly at several faces in the crowd. "They didn't want a wife or a helpmate. They wanted something I cannot say in polite company." Murmurs rippled through the room. Several women nodded knowingly, their own memories perhaps stirred. Then Eli McCall stood up with his $1, all the money he had in the world, and bought my freedom. Not my body. Your Honor, my freedom. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. He took me to his home and gave me the one thing no one else would: respect. He slept on the floor for weeks so I would feel safe. He never touched me without permission. He taught me that kindness could exist without expectation.
She turned to face the crowd. You call him mute, like it's something shameful. Yes, Apache warriors stole his voice when he was just a boy defending this territory. But I have never known a man who could say more without words. His hands speak of gentleness when they tend injured animals. His eyes speak of joy when he watches the sunrise. His actions speak of love every single day. Walking to Eli, she took his hands in hers. This man could have taken advantage of me 1,000 times over. Instead, he courted me with wildflowers and sketches. He taught me to read the mountains and the seasons. He made me feel valuable when the rest of the world had thrown me away. She faced the judge again. We spoke our vows on a mountaintop at sunset, with God as our witness. No, we don't have papers, but I have something more precious. I have a home, a partner, a future, and I carry his child. Gasps echoed through the room. Eli's eyes widened, his hands tightening on hers. She hadn't meant to reveal it this way, but desperation drove her forward. If you send me away, if you punish us for finding love in a world that showed us none, then you condemn not just us but an innocent child? Is that the justice this court stands for? The silence was deafening. Then, from the back of the room, a woman stood. Clarabelle recognized her as the seamstress who had nodded to her on the street. I was a mail-order bride too, the woman said quietly. 20 years ago, the man who sent for me beat me nightly. When I ran, the law dragged me back, said I was his property, bought and paid for. She looked at the judge. If this court punishes real love while protecting false ownership, then we have learned nothing. Another woman stood. My sister answered an advertisement. The man who met her sold her to a brothel the same day. She died there. More women rose, one by one, sharing stories that had long been whispered but never spoken aloud. The comfortable narrative of mail-order brides finding prosperity crumbled under the weight of their testimonies. Mrs. Adelaide Prescott pushed through the crowd, her cane thumping on the floor. Harrison? She addressed the judge with the familiarity of long acquaintance. I've lived in this territory longer than most. I've seen good men and bad, true marriages and false ones. What these two have is real. Any fool can see it. The law, Judge Harrison began. The law should serve justice, not hinder it. Mrs. Prescott interrupted. If you need papers, then give them papers. Marry them yourself right here, right now. You have that authority. That's highly irregular. So is selling women at auction, but nobody seemed troubled by that. Another woman called out. The judge looked increasingly uncomfortable as the mood in the room shifted. What had begun as a simple moral violation case was becoming something larger, a reckoning with how the frontier treated its women. Thornton stood, face red with anger. This is ridiculous. She's a woman of loose morals who's bewitched a half-wit mute. The sound of a chair scraping stopped him. Eli had risen, moving with the dangerous grace Clarabelle had seen only once before, when the riders had threatened her. He walked slowly toward Thornton, who backed away despite himself. Now see here, Thornton blustered. Eli pulled out his slate and wrote in large letters, showing it to the room. You bid $60 for her. I paid $1. Who values her more? That doesn't... Eli erased and wrote again. You wanted to own. I wanted to save. Your Honor. Davis, the lawyer, found his voice. My client makes an excellent point. The very fact that Mr. Thornton participated in the illegal auction undermines his moral authority in this matter. The auction wasn't illegal, Thornton protested. Wasn't it? Judge Harrison leaned forward. Selling human beings, even under the pretense of marriage contracts? That sounds dangerously close to slavery, which has been illegal in this territory for decades. The color drained from Thornton's face as he realized his mistake. Several other men who had participated in the bidding began edging toward the door. It seems to me, the judge continued, that the real crime here was committed by those who put Miss Hartley on that block in the first place. Sheriff Briggs, I trust you'll be investigating that matter thoroughly. The sheriff nodded grimly. Yes, Your Honor. As for you, the judge turned to Clarabelle and Eli. While your situation is indeed irregular, I find no evidence of moral violation. Love,
however it comes to us, is not a crime." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. "However, for the sake of propriety and the child you carry, I am willing to perform a civil ceremony if you so desire." Clarabelle turned to Eli, who was still processing her pregnancy announcement. She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you," she whispered. His eyes filled with tears, the first she'd ever seen from him. He pulled her close, his body shaking with emotion. Then he drew back, dropped to one knee in front of everyone, and wrote on his slate, "Marry me again?" "Yes," Clarabelle laughed through her tears. "1,000 times yes." What followed was perhaps the strangest wedding Border's Edge had ever seen. The courtroom became a chapel. The accusers became witnesses. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony with surprising gentleness, adapting the traditional vows so Eli could nod his consent while Clarabelle spoke for both of them when needed. "Do you, Eli McCall, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Eli nodded firmly, his eyes never leaving Clarabelle's face. "Do you, Clarabelle Hartley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said clearly. "I took him in my heart months ago. This just makes it official." When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the courtroom erupted in applause, led, surprisingly, by the women who had found courage to share their own stories. Even some of the men joined in, perhaps recognizing that the old ways of the frontier needed changing. As Eli kissed his bride, Thornton slunk from the courtroom, followed by Sheriff Briggs and a deputy. His days of running auctions were over. Mrs. Prescott approached the newlyweds, pressing a small package into Clarabelle's hands. "A wedding gift," she said gruffly. "And there's a proposition. I need someone to manage my ranch hand's correspondence. Many can't read or write. The position comes with a small house on my property, closer to town for when the baby comes." Clarabelle looked at Eli, who squeezed her hand. She understood his thoughts. Their mountain valley was perfect, but isolated. When her time came, she would need midwives. "Help. We'll think about it," Clarabelle said gratefully. As they prepared to leave, woman after woman approached them with quiet congratulations and offers of help. The sisterhood of frontier women, long silent, had found its voice. That night, they camped under the stars halfway between Border's Edge and their valley. Eli had borrowed a wagon for Clarabelle, insisting she not ride horseback in her condition. As they lay by the fire, she curled against him. Finally safe, finally legal, finally free. Eli traced letters on her palm in the darkness. "Thank you." "For what?" "Speaking. For both." She kissed his scarred throat tenderly. "I will always be your voice when you need me. But Eli, you spoke louder today than any words could. You showed them who you really are." His hand moved to rest on her stomach, wonder in his touch. "Are you happy?" she asked. "About the baby." He nodded against her hair, then wrote on her palm, "Scared too." "Why scared?" "Can't sing lullabies." Clarabelle's heart broke a little. "Oh, my love, you'll teach our child so much more than songs. You'll teach them courage and kindness and how to read the language of the mountains. You'll teach them that love doesn't always need words." They stayed awake long into the night, planning their future under a canopy of stars. The threat that had driven them to town had become an unexpected blessing. They were legal now, protected by law as well as love. The child growing within Clarabelle would be born legitimate, with a father's name and a mother's fierce devotion. As dawn broke over the mountains, they continued their journey home. Behind them lay the dust and judgment of Border's Edge. Ahead waited their valley, their garden, their life together. The world hadn't become perfect overnight. There would still be those who looked askance at a mute man and his mail-order bride. But they had each other, and they had won the right to their happiness. In the end, that was worth more than all the gold in the mountains. The wagon rolled into their valley as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines. Everything was as they'd left it. The cabin standing sturdy against the mountainside, the garden showing signs of neglect but still salvageable, the horses whinnying their welcome from the corral.
Yet something had changed. This wasn't just Eli's hidden sanctuary anymore. It was their legally recognized home. Clarabelle climbed down from the wagon, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The morning sickness had started on the journey back, confirming what she had suspected for weeks. Eli was immediately at her side, his face creased with concern. "I'm fine," she assured him, though she gratefully accepted his supporting arm. "Just tired." He led her inside, settling her in the rocking chair before beginning to unload their supplies. Mrs. Prescott had insisted on sending them home with provisions: flour, salt pork, dried beans, and even some precious white sugar. "For the baby," the old woman had said with a wink, as Eli worked. Clarabelle looked around the cabin with new eyes. It would need changes for a child. The sharp corners of the rough-hewn furniture would need sanding. The ladder to the small loft would need rails. But these were good problems to have. The problems of a family preparing for growth rather than a woman alone and desperate. That evening, as they sat down to their first meal as legally married couple, Clarabelle noticed Eli had set 3 plates. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face, and pointed to her stomach, then to the 3rd plate. "Oh, Eli," she laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "You wonderful, foolish man. The baby won't need a plate for quite some time." But he left it there anyway. A promise and a welcome to the child not yet born. Over the following days, they worked to restore order to their small homestead. The garden needed immediate attention, vegetables left too long on the vine, weeds threatening to choke out the late crops. They worked side by side in comfortable rhythm, Eli insisting Clarabelle take frequent breaks, despite her protests that she felt fine. It was during one of these enforced rest periods that they saw riders approaching. Clarabelle tensed, memories of Thornton and his men still fresh. But Eli, watching from the porch, relaxed and raised his hand in greeting. 3 women rode into the yard: Mrs. Prescott, Martha Briggs, and, surprisingly, the seamstress who had spoken up at the trial, who introduced herself as Helen Morrison, no relation to that scoundrel who abandoned you. Helen said quickly, "Common name out here. We've come to see how you're settling in. And to bring gifts," Martha added, dismounting with a bundle. "Baby things. Most of us have more than we need, and it's good to see them used again." They stayed for tea, filling the cabin with feminine chatter that Clarabelle hadn't realized she'd missed. The women examined the cabin with practical eyes, suggesting improvements and offering help. "You'll need to think about the birth," Mrs. Prescott said bluntly. "This valley's beautiful, but it's far from help. My offer still stands. The house on my property is yours if you want it." Clarabelle looked at Eli, who was listening from his spot by the fireplace. They had discussed this during their journey home, writing notes back and forth in the wagon. "We've decided to accept," Clarabelle said, "but not permanently. Just for the last month before the baby comes and the first few months after. This valley is our home. We'll always come back." Mrs. Prescott nodded approvingly. "Sensible. The house is ready when you are." After the women left, promising to return with more supplies and baby clothes, Clarabelle found Eli standing at the edge of the meadow, watching the sunset. "Are you sure about leaving here, even temporarily?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. He nodded, then wrote on his ever-present slate, "Your safety more important than my mountains." "Our mountains," she corrected gently, "and we'll be back before the aspens turn gold again." As autumn progressed, their lives took on new rhythms. Eli built a cradle with the same careful attention he gave to all his work, sanding the wood until it was silk smooth. Clarabelle sewed tiny clothes from the fabric the women had brought, often finding Eli watching her with an expression of wonder. The mountain valley prepared for winter around them. Elk bugled in the distance, their haunting calls echoing off the peaks. The aspens turned brilliant gold, creating a canvas of color against the dark pines. And Clarabelle's body changed with the seasons.
the child within making its presence increasingly known. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Clarabelle gasped and grabbed Eli's hand, pressing it to her rounded belly. "Feel," she whispered. Under his palm, a tiny flutter, the baby's first movement strong enough to be felt from outside. Eli's eyes widened with awe. He knelt before her chair, both hands now cradling her stomach, waiting for another sign of the life they'd created. When it came, a definite kick this time, he looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. He'd never made a sound since she'd known him, but she could swear she heard something escape his damaged throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, but purely joy. "I know," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "I know, my love. It's a miracle." He wrote on the slate, "Never thought I'd be a father." "Why not?" He gestured to his throat, then wrote, "Who would want broken man?" "I would," Clarabelle said firmly. "I do. And this child will be the luckiest in the territory to have you as a father. You'll teach them so much. What if—" He started to write, then erased it. "What if what? Tell me. What if baby is like me, silent?" Clarabelle considered this. "Then we'll love them just as fiercely. We'll teach them to speak with their hands, their eyes, their hearts, just as you do. Silence isn't emptiness. Eli, you've taught me that." He kissed her then, pouring all his fears and hopes into the connection. When they parted, she could see the worry hadn't entirely left his eyes, but determination had joined it. Whatever came, they would face it together. As November arrived with serious snow, they made the decision to move to Mrs. Prescott's property earlier than planned. The mountain passes would become treacherous soon, and Eli refused to risk Clarabelle making the journey when she was further along. Packing their necessary belongings felt strange. The cabin had been their whole world for months, their sanctuary and kingdom combined. But Clarabelle noticed Eli carefully securing everything they left behind, preparing the cabin to weather their absence and welcome their return. "It's not goodbye," she said, standing in the doorway for a last look. "Just see you in spring." Eli nodded, but she caught him glancing back multiple times as they rode away, as if memorizing every detail. The house on Mrs. Prescott's ranch was modest but comfortable. 2 rooms instead of 1, real glass windows, and blessed proximity to other women who knew about birthing babies. Mrs. Prescott herself lived in the main ranch house but visited daily, taking an almost grandmotherly interest in Clarabelle's pregnancy. "Never had children myself," she confided one afternoon. "My husband died young, and I never found another man I could tolerate. But I've helped birth half the babies in this territory. You're in good hands." Eli found work around the ranch, his skill with horses quickly making him invaluable. The ranch hands, initially wary of the silent man, soon came to respect his expertise. Clarabelle, following through on her promise, helped several of them write letters home, learning their stories in the process. Winter settled over the territory like a heavy blanket. The mountains surrounding their valley were lost in clouds and snow, but Clarabelle knew Eli's heart remained there. Sometimes she'd find him standing outside, looking toward the peaks, and she'd slip her arms around him from behind, her swollen belly pressed against his back, reminding him why they'd made this choice. One particularly cold evening, as they sat by the fire in their temporary home, Clarabelle felt a sudden sharp pain. She gasped, hand going to her stomach. Eli was beside her instantly, his face a mask of concern. "It's too early," she breathed. 2 months too early." But her body had other plans. The pains came in waves, increasing in intensity. Eli ran for Mrs. Prescott, who took one look at Clarabelle and sent him for the midwife. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear. The baby was coming too soon, too fast. Clarabelle gripped Eli's hand until her knuckles went white, drawing strength from his steady presence. He never left her side, cool cloths for her forehead appearing as if by magic, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Prescott said, though Clarabelle could see the worry she tried to hide. "Baby's just eager to meet you." When their son finally arrived,
tiny, too tiny, but crying with surprising vigor. Clarabelle sobbed with relief. Eli cut the cord with shaking hands, then cradled his child for the first time, his face a study in awe and terror. "He's small," the midwife said carefully, "but his lungs are strong. That's good. He'll need careful tending, kept warm, fed often. What about—" Clarabelle couldn't finish the question. "His voice," the midwife smiled. "He's certainly not silent. Listen to those lungs." Indeed, the baby's cries filled the room with life and promise. Eli touched his son's throat gently, feeling the vibrations of sound he could no longer make himself. They named him Samuel, meaning heard by God, a name full of hope and gratitude. The first weeks were terrifying. Samuel was so small, requiring constant care. But he was a fighter, gaining weight slowly but steadily, his cries growing stronger each day. Eli barely slept, keeping vigil over the cradle, starting at every small sound. One night, Clarabelle woke to find Eli's side of the bed empty. She found him in the main room, Samuel cradled against his chest, both of them bathed in moonlight from the window. Eli was tracing letters on the baby's tiny palm, teaching him the language of touch that had served them so well. "He knows your voice already," Clarabelle said softly. "Not the one you lost, but the one you found, the voice of your hands, your heart." Eli looked up at her, and she saw peace in his eyes for the first time since Samuel's early arrival. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Samuel grew stronger. His eyes, when they finally focused, were Eli's dark brown. His hair, what little there was, promised to be Clarabelle's gold. And his voice never faltered, was strong and clear and perfect. "He'll speak for both of you," Mrs. Prescott said one day, watching Eli play with his son. "That boy will have words enough for two." When the mountain passes finally cleared, they prepared for the journey home. Samuel was 3 months old, sturdy enough for travel. The women who had become their community gathered to see them off, arms full of advice and gifts. "You'll be back for the next one," Helen Morrison said with a wink. "This little house will be waiting." As they rode toward their valley, Samuel secure in a sling across Clarabelle's chest, she felt complete in a way she never had before. Behind them lay safety and community. Ahead lay home and the future they'd build together. "Look, Samuel," she whispered to her son as their valley came into view. "That's where Mama and Papa fell in love. That's where you'll learn to walk, to ride, to be the bridge between your father's silence and the world's noise." Eli reached over from his horse, his hand covering hers where it rested on Samuel's back. His eyes said everything: gratitude, love, promise, home. They were no longer two broken people who had found each other in desperation. They were a family, forged in hardship but tempered by love, returning to their mountain sanctuary not as refugees but as conquerors of their own fate. The cabin waited, patient and sturdy, ready to shelter this new chapter of their lives. And in Clarabelle's arms, Samuel gurgled happily, adding his voice to the chorus of their love story, a voice that would never be silenced, carrying forward the words his father could not speak and the love that needed no words at all. 5 years had passed since their return to the valley. The cabin had grown, with Eli adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen to accommodate their expanding family. Samuel, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's golden hair and his father's thoughtful eyes, raced through the meadow chasing butterflies, his laughter echoing off the mountain walls. Clarabelle watched from the porch, her hands resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy had been easier, planned and welcomed, without the fear that had marked Samuel's early arrival. She smiled as Eli emerged from the barn with a small girl clinging to his hand, their newest addition. Though not by blood, they had found Mary 2 months ago during a trip to Border's Edge, huddled behind the mercantile, orphaned and alone. She couldn't have been more than 3, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge for one so young. When Eli had knelt before her, offering his hand, she had taken it without hesitation.
as if recognizing a kindred spirit who understood silence. Mary hadn't spoken a word since they'd brought her home, but she didn't need to. In this family, silence was just another form of communication. Samuel had appointed himself her protector and translator, chattering enough for both of them, while Mary shadowed Eli everywhere, learning his quiet ways. "Papa's teaching Mary to gentle the new colt," Samuel announced, running up to the porch. "She's real good with horses, Mama. They listen to her even when she doesn't say nothing." "Anything," Clarabelle corrected gently. "When she doesn't say anything, that's what I said," Samuel replied with 5-year-old logic. "Can I have a cookie?" "After dinner. Go wash up, both of you." As the children scampered inside, Clarabelle saw riders approaching through the pass. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. Old fears never quite forgotten. But as they drew closer, she recognized Mrs. Prescott's distinctive gray mare. The old woman dismounted with surprising agility for her age, followed by Helen Morrison and 2 younger women Clarabelle didn't recognize. "Hope you don't mind unexpected company, Mrs. Prescott said. "These ladies heard about what you and Eli have done up here. They wanted to see for themselves." "What we've done?" Clarabelle asked, puzzled. Helen gestured around the valley. "Created a haven. Word spread about the mute cowboy and his mail-order bride who take in lost souls." She smiled. "These are the Patterson sisters. They have a proposition." The elder sister, who introduced herself as Ruth, spoke nervously. "We heard you took in an orphan. We're running an informal home for children in town, ones who've lost their parents to disease or accident or—" She trailed off. "Or worse," her sister Anna finished quietly. "Children nobody wants. We do our best, but we're overwhelmed. We wondered if you might consider taking another child, a boy. He's different." "Different how?" Clarabelle asked, though she suspected she already knew. "He doesn't speak. Hasn't since his parents died in a fire 2 years ago. He's 6 now, strong and helpful, but people think he's cursed or simple-minded. He's neither. We can see it in his eyes. He just needs understanding." Clarabelle looked toward the barn where Eli was working with Mary, teaching her through gesture and patience. "Bring him," she said simply. "This mountain has room for all kinds of voices." Within a month, Thomas had joined their unconventional family. He was a solemn boy with sandy hair and green eyes that watched everything. When Eli first knelt before him and signed a greeting, Thomas's eyes had widened with shock and hope. Here was an adult who understood that words weren't the only way to speak. The cabin rang with an odd mixture of sounds and silence. Samuel provided running commentary on everything, translating for Mary and Thomas even when they communicated perfectly well without him. Clarabelle's new daughter, born under a harvest moon and named Hope, added her own voice to the mix with healthy cries and coos. Eli had built a long table to accommodate their growing family, and mealtimes were a cheerful chaos of Samuel's chatter, signed conversations, and the comfortable silence of those who understood each other without words. Clarabelle often caught Eli watching it all with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe the fullness of their life. Their valley had become more than a hiding place. It had become a way station for those who needed shelter. Throughout the year, they would take in children temporarily while the Patterson sisters found more permanent arrangements. Some stayed days, some weeks. A few, like Mary and Thomas, stayed forever. The work was hard. More mouths meant larger gardens, more hunting, more trips to town for supplies, but the ranch had evolved to meet their needs. They raised horses now, Eli's gentle training methods producing mounts prized throughout the territory. Clarabelle had started a small school, teaching not just letters and numbers but sign language, ensuring all their children could communicate with each other. One autumn evening, as the first snow dusted the peaks, they received unexpected visitors. Sheriff Briggs arrived with a woman and 2 children, a boy of about 8 and a girl near Samuel's age. "This is Mrs. Thornton," the sheriff said uncomfortably. "Well," Widow Thornton now. Jake died last winter. Bad whiskey. Clarabelle stiffened at the name, remembering the man who had tried to sell her, but the woman before her looked nothing like the predator her husband had been. She was thin, worn, with the hollow eyes of someone who had endured too much. "Please," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know my husband was cruel to you. I know what he did. But my children, they're innocent. And I heard you help children here. You want to leave your children with us?" Clarabelle asked carefully. "I want to work for you." "Mrs.," Thornton said, straightening her shoulders. "I can cook, clean, help with the children. I'm not asking for charity, just a chance, away from town, away from his shadow." Clarabelle looked at Eli, who had been watching silently. He studied the woman for a long moment, then looked at her children, thin, scared, clinging to their mother's skirts. Finally, he nodded. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Clarabelle said. "We have a small cabin near the main house. It's yours if you're willing to work hard." The woman's tears came then, years of fear and shame flowing out. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." Elizabeth Thornton, as she chose to be called, proved to be exactly what their growing household needed. She was a wonder in the kitchen, stretching their resources to feed their expanding family. Her children, Jacob and Rose, slowly lost their fearful looks, blooming under the rough kindness of their new home. As winter settled over the valley, Clarabelle often found herself marveling at how far they'd come. The single-room cabin had grown into a compound. The main house, Elizabeth's cabin, a proper schoolhouse, expanded barns and corrals. What had begun as two broken people finding solace in each other had become a community. On Christmas Eve, their entire extended family gathered in the main house. The Patterson sisters had ridden up with 3 more children who needed temporary shelter. Mrs. Prescott arrived with packages in her usual gruff kindness. Helen Morrison brought her new husband, a widower with 2 young sons who immediately joined the chaos of children. The house overflowed with life. Samuel orchestrated a nativity play, assigning parts to everyone, using signs and words to ensure all could participate. Mary, still silent but no longer withdrawn, played Mary with solemn dignity. Thomas was a shepherd, herding the younger children with gentle authority. Even baby Hope had a role, playing herself as the Christ child. As Clarabelle watched the performance from Eli's arms, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. This was what love could build, not just a marriage or a family, but a whole world where the broken could become whole, where the silent could be heard, where those cast aside could find their place. "Thank you," she whispered to Eli, "for that $1, for taking a chance on me." He kissed her temple and signed with one hand. "Thank you for teaching me that love speaks all languages." After the children were tucked into beds scattered throughout the house, the adults gathered by the fire. Mrs. Prescott raised a glass of her special elderberry wine. "To the McCall family," she toasted, "who took this harsh land and made it gentle, who took society's cast-offs and made them treasures, who proved that sometimes the best families are the ones we build, not the ones we're born to." "Hear, hear," the others chorused. Elizabeth Thornton spoke up quietly. "My husband tried to destroy you," she said to Clarabelle. "Instead, you saved my children and me. I'll never understand that kind of grace." "It's simple," Clarabelle replied, finding Eli's hand in hers. "Someone showed me grace when I needed it most. How could I do less?" As the evening wound down and guests prepared for sleep, Eli and Clarabelle stepped out onto the porch. The valley lay pristine under fresh snow, the mountains standing guard as they always had. But now, smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Warm light spilled from windows, and the sound of sleeping children filled the air with promise. "We've come far from that auction block," Clarabelle said softly. Eli pulled her close, his hand moving to rest on her belly where, though she hadn't told him yet, she suspected another child grew. His eyes asked the question. "Yes," she laughed. "Again, this mountain seems to make us fertile in all ways." He spun her around,
silent laughter shaking his chest. When he set her down, he signed rapidly. "How many children can one valley hold?" "As many as need us." Clarabelle answered, "As many as find their way to our door." And they would keep coming. The orphaned, the different, the silent, the lost. The valley that had once hidden 2 wounded souls had become a beacon for those seeking sanctuary. The mail-order bride who'd faced the auction block and the silent cowboy who'd paid his last dollar had built something neither could have imagined. A family bound not by blood, but by choice. Not by words, but by love. In the years to come, their story would spread throughout the territory and beyond. Writers would romanticize it, preachers would sermonize about it, and historians would debate its details. But for now, on this cold Christmas night, it was simply their truth, messy and beautiful, difficult and rewarding, silent and singing all at once, as they went inside to join their sleeping family. Clarabelle paused at the threshold. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That dollar could have bought supplies, food, things you needed." Eli touched her face gently, then signed his answer. "That dollar bought me everything." And in the warm cabin filled with the breath of sleeping children, the crackle of the dying fire, and the endless possibility of love multiplied, it was clear he was right. Some investments pay dividends beyond measure. Some silences speak louder than symphonies. And sometimes, just sometimes, the price of salvation is exactly $1 silver and the courage to spend it. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the Wild West. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. If this tale of love, redemption, and found family touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Wild West Campfire for more stories that bring the frontier to life. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Eli and Clarabelle's story resonated with you? Share your reflections in the comments. And let's keep the campfire conversation going. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.